What is going on, everybody? It's time to talk about the Week 6 waiver wire. These are the players that I'm going to be prioritizing. We're also going to talk some stashes, some players that you can add right now to stay a week ahead of your league mates. Save yourself some fab. That's always the way to go if you can do it. So without further ado, here we go. The first, we're going to start with position. So I'm going to start with quarterback, work my way to tight end, through running back and wide receiver. So my preferred quarterback target this week, if you need a quarterback, is Jackson Dart. He's rostered in just 39% of Yahoo leagues. Now, if Sam Darnold's available, he would be my number 2 option, rostered in 20% of leagues. But fantasy managers, I think, are going to be able to depend on Jackson Dart for really one reason. He can run the football. This week, even though Dart didn't play particularly well, he threw 2 interceptions. He still did run the ball 7 times for 55 yards. And this week, the Giants play an Eagles team on Thursday night. The Giants are likely going to be in trail mode, and this means that there are going to be a lot of opportunities for him to scramble around and score fantasy points. And I also think he could be playable for the rest of the year. Say maybe Lamar Jackson's injury lingers. Who knows what your situation might be at quarterback. Maybe you're just streaming. I do think Jackson Dart is going to be playable because of that rushing floor that he's going to provide. Now, there are some options that I would prefer, like if Matthew Stafford is out there, I would prefer him, even though the upside isn't as tantalizing. But I still think Dart is going to be a very, very much a playable quarterback for the rest of the season. Let's go to the running back position. Hassan Haskins, I think, is the guy that's going to be at the top of many people's lists. He's widely available as he's rostered in just 2% of leagues. And we all know that Amari and Hampton's now on IR. So that leaves Hassan Haskins and Kamani Vidal, who we're going to talk about here in a little bit, as the only 2 running backs that are left to play on the Chargers now that Najee Harris and Amari and Hampton are out. My bet would be on Haskins as the guy you want to prioritize on the waiver wire this week because he's a little bit bigger and he's likely going to take on that short yardage and goal line work. It is interesting to note that Los Angeles basically had Haskins and Kamani Vidal split the snaps and the opportunities with Hampton out. This past week, Haskins had 14 snaps, ran 7 of 41 routes, 1 target, 5 carries, compared to Kamani Vidal, 14 snaps, 6 of 41 routes run, 1 target, and 4 carries. And it's for this reason, I wouldn't go crazy with a waiver wire bid unless maybe you have Amari and Hampton, but I'd still be relatively aggressive here. I think anywhere from 20 to 25%, somewhere in the low 20-ish percent range feels about right. Maybe 15 to 20 if you aren't as desperate for a running back. But I think a better approach here would be to place a modest bid on both Haskins and Vidal because from what we know, this was a 50-50 split, when Hampton went out, as we talked about. So it could be Kamani Vidal that wins the job. We just don't know. My guess is probably Haskins, but again, I am just grasping here at what I've seen from the little that we've seen when both of these players have been available and both other running backs have been out. Speaking of Kamani Vidal, he's rostered in just 1% of leagues. And I would also put a bid on Vidal. Vidal profiles as a smaller, although not really that much smaller, 5'8", 215, change of pace back, although, again, he does have good size. As we mentioned when we talked about Haskins, the opportunities were basically split right down the middle when Hampton went out with an injury, so you just never know. That's why I think anywhere from 12 to 15% on Vidal, maybe 15 to 20% on Haskins, maybe up to 25%. I think that's a good range. Again, this is not like a 50 to 100% situation here. If you have Hampton, maybe a little bit more, maybe like 25 to 30, but I wouldn't go crazy here. Let's talk about Michael Carter. I do think Michael Carter is somebody that you can place a pretty hefty bid on if he's available because Imari DiMercato may have fumbled his opportunity out of the back of the end zone, what little opportunity he had. And Michael Carter clearly led this team in carries anyway, 18 carries, 51 yards, a touchdown, 5 receptions, 22 yards on 5 targets. And Carter's going to be the guy until Trey Benson returns from his stint on IR. And why I would put a pretty hefty bid on Michael Carter is that this could be a stint that lasts longer than 4 weeks because he underwent, Trey Benson, that is, underwent arthroscopic surgery on his meniscus and is officially out from 4 to 6 weeks. But surgery recovery time varies from individual to individual. Not that I'm some expert, but for this reason, I think Michael Carter, I think upwards of 25 to 30%, maybe 30 to 40% if you're desperate at the running back position. And especially if you have Trey Benson, I think is a good percentage of fab to bid on him because we saw what the usage was. And unlike, Hassan Haskins and Kamani Vidal, it was clear, Michael Carter was the guy. Let's talk about Kendre Miller. Kendre Miller led the Saints in carries with 10 and was more efficient with his carries than Alvin Kamara this week. Kendre Miller averaged 4.1 yards per carry to Kamara's 3.4. The problem with Kendre Miller is that Kamara, as we all know, is still the vastly superior pass-catching running back. This is going to limit Kendre Miller's upside from week to week, but he should have a weekly floor with those carries going forward and should be rostered in 12-man leagues. Miller played on 26 of 66 snaps, ran 9 of 32 routes, and was targeted one time. These next two players are more of the stash variety, but I do think it's important to stash them now because we just never know what's going to happen, especially considering one team is coming out of their bye week. So we're going to start with Brashard Smith. I don't know if the data's out yet. I'm recording this on Tuesday morning. Brashard Smith played last night on Monday Night Football, and we know Pacheco and Kareem Hunt are in the way. But from a pass-catching perspective, Smith is extremely talented. He might be their most explosive running back in that way, like in terms of pass catching, but he's more of a stash for now. If anything happens to Pacheco, if anything happens to Kareem Hunt, then Brashard Smith would likely get more usage in the offense. And Kyle Monangai, rostered in just 5% of leagues. I do not believe in DeAndre Swift. No, I do not. I think he's a very, very bad running back. So far, Swift is averaging 3.3 yards per carry, and the Bears' offensive line, especially on the interior, is playing better than that. Although they're not playing great, the Bears' offensive line ranks number 23 according to PFF, but their two best players on the offensive line are Drew Dahlman and Joe Tooney, who play center and guard. And Monangai may not be playing good either, 3.6 yards per carry, but coming out of the bye, it wouldn't shock me if he gets more usage, and the Bears currently have no one else. Now, wide receiver is a bit thin this week, but there are some options that I think are intriguing, and especially if some of your league mates have some knee-jerk reactions to what happened this week, I still think the usage is there for some of these guys, and one of those players would be Troy Franklin, who's rostered in just 30% of leagues anyway, and I bet he gets dropped some this week by some, especially in shallower leagues. Franklin looks to be the team's wide receiver 2 in terms of snaps played and routes run. Even though he didn't show up in the box score this week, doesn't mean that he won't show up in future weeks. His usage tells us that he should have some good games in store, especially considering the connection he has with college teammate Bo Nix. And it's not just this week. It's been multiple weeks now where he has been used on the field as their wide receiver 2. So if someone drops him, I would scoop him up and add him. Alec Ayumanor, rostered in 33% of leagues. Ayumanor led the Titans in snaps and routes run this past week. 48 of 67 snaps, 36 of 42 routes run, 4 targets. Similarly to Franklin, I know Ayumanor didn't show up in the box score this week because Calvin Ridley went off. This was the Calvin Ridley breakout game that many of you have been waiting for. But Ayumanor is clearly the wide receiver 2 in this offense. If anyone drops him, again, I would scoop him up. And I'm going to mix in a few stashes here as well in between some players that I just have to throw out there because it's a PSA. These are in no particular order. Maybe they should be. Let me know in the comments. But Luther Burden is rostered in just 11% of Yahoo leagues, and the usage is not going to be there for him. But coming out of the bye week, I would expect maybe the Bears have more of a plan to utilize their explosive second-round rookie maybe a little bit more. And this is nothing more than a stash for now, but it could prove very fruitful if anything were to happen to Roma Dunze or DJ Moore. And you're going to think I'm crazy, but he's also not a horrible desperation flex play. If you have a ton of people on a bye week, the Bears just are coming out of their bye. So if you're looking for all the upside in the world, I know his usage isn't great, but we saw what he can do with limited usage. if you're looking for upside, Luther Burden has it, and he's not the worst flex play you can throw out there if you're very, very desperate. Only if you're very, very desperate. I know some people are going to come after me in the comments for that, but I do think it's true. Isaiah Bond, 6% rostered. With Cedric Tillman out, it looks like Bond is going to be the number 2 option at the wide receiver position. Now, it really didn't translate to fantasy points, but Bond was targeted 7 times this past week, and the Browns' offense was at least able to play somewhat decent against the Minnesota defense. They played a lot better than I thought they would. Bond was on the field for 40 of 70 snaps, ran 31 of 36 routes, and was targeted 7 times. Jalen Coker is going to return to practice this week, and that could mean he plays as early as week 6 on an offense that could really use him back. We saw what he was able to do last year, and I think he is a really good ad. Again, rostered in just 9% of leagues. Here's a PSA. I think Trey Tucker, who's rostered in 46% of leagues, if he's available, I think you have to add him. He's a good bye-week fill-in at this point. Tucker is a full-time player, 60 of 68 snaps this week, 37 of 41 routes run, and 6 targets, tied Jacoby Myers for 6 targets. Let's talk about the tight end position, because I do think that there are a couple options here that could be really useful to you. And the first one, we talked about him last week, Mason Taylor, I think is a playable tight end in fantasy football for the rest of the season because of the usage that he has been seeing in the offense. This week, he played on 68 of 81 snaps, ran 45 of 54 possible routes, and was targeted 9 times. This led to 9 catches for 67 yards. And this Jets team is going to be in trail mode a lot, which is going to mean a lot of opportunities are going to come his way. Mason Taylor, I think, is my priority ad at the tight end position this week. But if you cannot get him, AJ Barner, and I cannot believe I'm going to say this as he's rostered in just 2% of leagues, I think Barner's another tight end that you can feel confident starting if you need someone, if you have somebody on a bye. This week, he played on 48 of 60 snaps, ran 22 of 34 possible routes, was targeted 7 times. This led to 7 catches for 52 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he's not going to catch 2 touchdowns every week, but I still think that Barner's a guy that you can play and feel relatively confident that he's going to put up some fantasy points for you. Now, would I play him over some of the better tight end options? Probably not. But still, I think he's a guy that you need to consider adding, especially if you have a tight end on a bye week. So thank you so much for watching. That's going to do it for us. If you liked what you saw, click the like button, subscribe to the channel. And until next time, be good, everybody, and we will see you later.